who don't know, this is Drew. My second guest on my second attribution time is another Drew. I love Drews. Apparently, that's just how it goes.
It's a good name.
It's just a solid name, really. Drew is the VP of Revenue at STS Cloud. What does that mean, Drew?
Cool. So when I talk about revenue, I talk about full GTM and operations related thereto. So it's everything from marketing to sales to customer success and customer experience, and also weaving in product definition and product functionality, and of course, all of the various operations, data stack, and whatever you need to actually get that done, as well as strategy and process.
So just all the things.
All the things.
All the
so
things.
I'm lucky in the fact that my career has been varied and sundry. I've been a seller. I've done customer success. I've also been a demand marketer, and then I've done ops in every single one of those roles, and related to every one of those roles, and then also had the opportunity to work at many different types of companies and worked agency, vendor, and in-house. So, kind of fun to be able to bring that to my current role.
Yeah, we've run the gambit, right? I mean, I'll put your LinkedIn and the description below. But you and I met while you were at HashiCorp.
Yeah, absolutely.
We went through Visible implementation together there, and we've stayed in touch since. But we had a lot of fun doing that. I still tell the joke. I've completely stole it. I've never given you credit, but when it was called Visible, I'm like, yeah, we just call it Busyable, like because it just keeps you so busy. And that was totally Drew. So whoever I've worked with and I've said that was actually this guy who said it. I've stolen it and used it since. But it is that. It's it's any operations, it's just something to keep you busy. But you did that, and then you went off to Mad Kudu, which is still a really, I follow them still, really cool product and what they do. We'll get into a little bit of that, of scoring and attribution and all that jazz. But
what do they really have to do with each other?
Yeah, how do they actually relate? So Drew, you got a lot of fun things going on LinkedIn. So I highly encourage everyone to follow you. But tell me about Revenue Writers. That's kind of a new thing you've kicked off here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's Friday, so you caught me in my USA Cycling t-shirt, hanging out, working from home after a really intense, actually very endurance-based week at Dreamforce and OpStars. Super fun to be on the ground there. Like, had a lovely time, with lots of old friends and new friends. Really interesting conversations with a number of partners for STS Cloud, and just honestly, that's actually one thing that I would say is central to Revenue Riders, is my passion for cycling. And when I was interviewing for my current role with my CEO, Derek Hitchman, we were talking about the fact that I'm really into riding. He's actually a mountain biker. My COO, Bobby Coffin, is a triathlete, and so we all ride bikes. And we were like, well, what is this thing about like endurance sports and maybe the correlation to, if you will, like a bit of a type A personality and like driving yourself to succeed and also go to market, right? Really getting out there and competing and being interested in competition at either a macro or a micro level. And so Revenue Writers is really interesting because I connected with Jason Saltzman at Live Data Technologies because I mentioned on LinkedIn that I was going to be doing some riding and like traveling around while I was working, because I'm a ride leader for Rafa, and whenever I'm in a city that has a Rafa clubhouse, I try to rent a bike and ride with the club there and do that whole thing.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. Like Jason's actually an ex-pro cyclist.
Is that like a dream? I mean, how many pro cyclists have you met in your time, Drew?
Probably at this point, I'm coming up on like 20 or 30.
Okay, so not that big of a deal.
Yeah,
I think I've met like two people that are pro in some kind of sports thing in my life. So that, maybe cycling's a little different, but
yeah, cycling's an interesting sport that way. The dividing line, and this one of the charms of the sport is that the dividing line between a pro and an amateur athlete, because it's so open, because it's not a sport that's played in stadiums, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not played on a field. The fans are like right there next to the riders, that you can literally walk up to the paddocks at the pro tour and like just talk to the riders or shake their
Nice.
hand or whatever.
Yeah.
So and in cyclocross, actually a European discipline that involves a lot of mud and running and sometimes not riding your bike all that much.
Yeah.
The part of the sport is actually heckling the riders, and so like the most creative heckling is actually appreciated within the sport. So
Nice.
it's a very different atmosphere that way. So anyway, Jason's an ex-pro, and he and I, connected. We went for a ride, and of course, for him, that was like very relaxed, and for me, I was like, zone 3 or 4 cardio. So,
Yeah.
but we had the conversation, and he's a growth marketer, and I'm in rev ops and revenue overall. And we were like, there's a lot of correlations and ways that your physical pursuits or athletic pursuits inform your professional pursuits and vice versa.
Right.
And so telling those stories is kind of what we're doing. And we've got the second episode coming out next week,
Nice.
and a couple of other participants in the hopper. And, we're also not looking at just like pros. We're looking to speak with people who are successful in their professional careers and maybe have an athletic pursuit outside of that, and just how they've learned,
Right.
all that cross pollination and how that's informed their pursuit is really interesting to us.
Yeah, we're seeing a movement with that, like even H straight. There's a lot of these new, I guess not self-help, which I mean it kind of fits in that, but these personal coachings where there's a tie between taking care of yourself, pushing yourself to some extent, and then also your personal or your professional growth as well. So it's an interesting move we're seeing within culture. All right, so it's called attribution time. So we're going to dive a little bit into that. But before we do full attribution, I think you and I before the call we were talking about revenue operations, and I think for us there was kind of these light bulb moments of how attribution begins to actually associate there. And so I would love for us to tee off the talk around attribution with your view and how you define revenue operations. And then we'll kind of move into that and expand where marketing attribution hits home.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably one of my favorite subjects, and the corollary between the two is super high. When I say revenue operations, it relates to my role as defined at SCS Cloud, which is of course VP revenue. And that I even put it in parentheses these days on my title because it's full GTM plus RevOps.
Right.
So it really is all of the various component parts that go into your go-to-market strategy, and how those are facilitated at a strategy, process, and systems level. And I will say, like, yes, like of course, like we can be cliche about like the 3 Ps, like people, process.
Yeah, sure.
But at the same time, that people portion is super important, and that is a management discipline. But that piece is is something that I think needs to be developed over the course of one's career, and managing people and understanding people is something that we all need to work on no matter what. So really like that approach overall is making sure that those are all aligned and facilitating the overall go-to-market motion. So that's RevOps.
Right. Yeah. And so with, one thing I really harp on within attribution, right, is the reason why people buy marketing attribution tools, or at least try to do marketing attribution with their stack, is because at the end of the day, it's about revenue, right? It's about understanding the dollar. And that might seem very elementary in how we approach it, but it's one of those where it's not enough people are doing that, where everyone's bidding for, well, this event happened, and so I take credit for this, and then sales is going to take credit for this, and then whoever's in charge of lead gen is going to take credit for this, and so we end up with 3 times the amount of revenue that we actually have on paper because everyone's taking credit for it, right? And that doesn't work
if you're doing straight like influenced approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And more, that's typically what happens because everyone wants a piece of the pie, and that's why marketing attribution is so helpful. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about like the motion in which you've taken with marketing attribution, how that may apply a little bit to what you're doing now, or even not at all. But like, you and I have talked a lot about marketing attribution over the time that we've known each other. But tell me a little bit about how you've implemented your approach to it. And then we'll get into maybe some of the downfalls of marketing attribution as well.
100%. So I'll just say like the most senior consideration of an attribution model really comes down to traction, right?
Mhm.
So what are those actions? What are those campaigns? What are those interactions that really give you the most traction in accelerating pipeline and revenue?
Yeah.
So what I think is, significantly or grossly underplayed is the focus on your average or median buyer journey length, or your average or median sales cycle, and how does that really become accelerated by the various touch points that are experienced within the buyer journey.
Right.
And I think that this leads to a very, maybe a lesser known feature, in that I always loved to kind of compare my own model against inside of Visible, was the AI model in Visible, which was like kind of like
Yeah.
introduced I think around like 2018.
Yeah.
And looking at those numbers and seeing like, okay, those are kind of the attribution percentages that you want to use throughout the model at various critical junctures or breakpoints or whatever you call them, right?
Yeah.
Each platform has its own, proprietary jargon.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But that's the thing, is that, I think that's how I look at attribution, is making sure that if you're going to go at the technical level and you're going to govern it from a central perspective, you have to get everybody on the same page. It's the thing that should be a driving force for coordination within the organization.
Yeah.
And to get marketing, sales, customer success, and even product to all talk to each other.
Right. Yeah. That's the one thing I really preach, is like, marketing attribution is people buy the tool, they get all their marketing channels or efforts plugged in, and then it's really encouraging them to, okay, what are the other sources in which we can pull in? What's product doing? What's sales doing? How do we identify what's meaningful and valuable there, or at least how would they define that? One thing, I'll come back to that, but one thing that you mentioned that I really, really liked, that I'm also going to steal from you, just as a heads up, is more my
like
typical approach. Yeah, it's the most flattering thing I can do. typically, what I like to do is, okay, well, let's look at whatever's closed lost as far as an opportunity, and let's look at what that journey looked like, and then compare that to what is closed won. And then we look at the touch points along that journey and compare. But I love what you said there is like, look at kind of the accelerators. And that's spot on, right? It's where what's not closed loss, but what's stalling these deals? What is the thing that's not getting these over? And then how do we accelerate those things based upon these other ops that have closed won on them? And I think that's just a great call out. And I want to just highlight that for whoever's watching, right? Because I think, it's that's actually probably a little bit more challenging than looking at lost and won, because it's what's done is done, right? And you
Yeah.
can't do much. And so it's hitting those accelerators and really moving past it. But to your point, that's where if you start working across different organization or different teams within the org, that's how you can hit those accelerators. If you're not communicating, it's hard to hit those accelerators because it's not only marketing that's going to drive it, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely. No,
they're
and
not the only ones with
it's
the gas
not.
pedal, right?
No, and
Yeah.
it's not just marketing that drives it. One of the things that I think is really interesting in the space that SES Cloud plays in is looking at the total customer experience, right? And this is one thing that, very often attribution's only applied to the upper funnel, right? And not the
Yeah.
lower funnel in terms
Yeah.
of, customer success, onboarding through to actual adoption and advocacy. Um, and I think what's interesting around that is, and I'll hit this a little harder later on because we kind of pre-gamed this in our agenda, but
Yeah.
what about attributing all of those actions that happen, right? Like the
Yeah.
interaction and the engagement in customer onboarding.
Mhm.
What about the interaction and engagement with uh, your digital invoicing or accounting, right? How often, are is that engagement a positive or negative indicator of potential churn, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
and
and we can
how do
go
you
there
mitigate
now.
those
I
things?
think what's interesting about that too is are these different funnels? Are they different? Because there's different modeling, right, for what's new business, what's recurring business, and things like that. So
Expansion, right?
yeah. So would you define those as, I guess, within that, do you have all one entire model based upon that within these different departments, or do you kind of segment those different funnels in which how they function? How would you approach that? What's your thought?
I mean, I think, these days everything that's old is new again, right? And
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and
I still
I'll
wear bell-bottom jeans. It's great. That's the thing.
sick. I
Yeah.
was gonna break out my Jinkos from the '90s, like my
Yeah.
white
It's so
pipes,
good.
like.
Man,
Uh,
so good. The fact that a mullet is stylish right now, I mean, and has like continued to like hang on, like every college quarterback has a mullet. It's like, man, we've made it like a full circle. Anyways, I
yeah,
digress.
yeah. I mean, my current Oakleys here are basically like throwbacks to the '80s version,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So there you
Yeah,
go. It's like, but including the neon yellow. It's just
yeah, I love
completely
it.
garish. Um, so no, I think in a go-to-market sense, you see people calling out the fact that cold calling, if it's done elegantly and with manners, is actually a really great outbounding approach, right?
Mhm.
You also look at you also look at I mean, may they rest in peace to a certain degree, right? Like the serious decisions approach of looking at the upper and lower funnels and looking at the demand waterfall, right? Like
Yeah,
it's so funny, like these concepts and these terms, right? It totally dates us to a certain degree as like,
yeah,
senior marketers, like
yeah,
and
yeah,
salespeople. But
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
it's funny because if it works and if it's applied correctly, and the proof is in the pudding, it's with that application, that you actually start to develop these insights. And it is really that grunt work. And that's the glory and the travesty of revenue
Yeah.
operations, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to do that system level work, you have to do that data hygiene work in order to facilitate the insights that then lead to that storytelling and eventually that strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's spot on. Um, I think the one thing I keep coming back to, and I mentioned this in the last attribution time, is the data hygiene piece is anyone who's been in MOPS or revenue operations knows how challenging that can be. I'm excited for where AI is headed as far as like helping maintain and continue to like monitor to clean up things. But I have a hard time with like living in it. I don't know about you, but like actually living in data hygiene, like I have a hard time believing like AI is just gonna fully get it and like clear that up for us. I think we're a ways away from like truly identifying how do we manage and clean that up. But my goal is to mention AI at least once in every call, just for the algorithm's sake. It'll pick up.
Well,
Um,
I had a conversation that was absolutely brilliant yesterday on that exact point. I saw a demo of a effectively a revenue data platform
mhm,
that is almost this platform called Signal, and
yeah,
they're just coming to market, but they are like just building something that is really exciting in terms of AI approach to business intelligence, to extenuated CDP or like an iPaaS on steroids,
yeah,
um, that really will facilitate a lot of those interesting like data hygiene problems, and address also like all of the various connections that you need in order to have centralized data. And just had an incredible conversation with their team over there, Mikhail and Nick. So pretty cool. Check them out.
yeah. I'll take that up. Um, all right, so we kind of mentioned about the different uh, engagements, the middle of the funnel, things of that sort. One thing I've really that you've mentioned in our conversations that I want to bring up here is what's the difference between scoring, the funnel, and attribution, right? Like I think you and I have both ran into kind of the nightmare situations of like, well, I'm scoring all these things, and so I want all these things to be included in part of my attribution. And it's like, well, is that necessary? No. I've also run into a pretty common one of like, well, we have all these stages that we want people to run through. And so all of these need to be a part of our attribution journey. And what we know, and anyone who's sold a deal is sales meets someone at a Dreamforce and they sell it, and well, all those things aren't a part of it anymore, right? They've run through it because it's just that's how Salesforce works, but it's not necessarily like the process. And so there's some tension at times when we think about attribution when it comes to scoring and all the different things that are happening there, and as well as the funnel. So tell me a little bit of your thoughts around that.
Well, it goes back to probably one of the earliest conversations that you and I ever had, which was, how can you potentially pull the data in around that outbounding activity, that sales activity that occurs, and attribute appropriately to that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh, you know, I think that's maybe least it's the least utilized function within Visible. I know that. And
yeah,
it's always been there, but people kind of go like, yeah, I don't really know how to think about it.
yeah,
And also, you know, but if you think about it in the 5 years since you and I started interacting,
yeah,
the data facilitation function on the front end of the CRM for sellers to actually get their data into the CRM using products like Scratchpad, et cetera, has just completely exploded, right? You have like Clary like coming,
Yeah.
with all of the automatic, calendar and activity logging, and
Yeah.
people.ai and those types of tools. So if you have it, in an enterprise shop, you would have those types of tools that are feeding the activity into the CRM. You'd then be able to pull that into your attribution modeling, and as long as it's well tagged and defined and you have really good rules, well then fine, like attribute that activity to sales activity, to outbound activity.
Yeah.
Or how much acceleration happens once you have like a stage 0, stage 1 op, and moving through to like proposal, negotiation, and eventually close one,
Yeah.
and those final details. I mean, I'm jumping the gun, but like this kind of brings it to, and I had this great conversation yesterday, not yesterday, 2 days ago at OpStars with Jeff Serlin, and he said, he said that he started his career in building cars, and so really looking at revenue as supply chain
Mm.
is an interesting point. And I completely agree with him on that because, of course, I'm biased. I mean, being a
Right.
NetSuite shop, we also like do a lot of, supply chain and manufacturing type stuff,
Yeah.
retail. And, but if you think about like that just in time approach and keeping things lean and making sure that the right action happens at the right time, that's customer journey, right?
Yeah. Right.
That's just what it should be.
Yeah.
Um, and so if you get that traction in place, even things like legal operations and deal desk and their activities and how fast those happen, and those turnarounds, it's funny to think about CPQ, quote to cash, invoicing, and collections as actual marketing channels or customer experience channels as well.
Yeah, yeah, they're a channel in which you need to track. Yeah, I guess more of customer experience. Yeah, I
Now,
wouldn't say marketing, but yeah, I can see
yeah,
that.
yeah, but
Yeah.
this is not, keeping it simple. This is,
No, it's good
if
though.
we're extending the application of attribution, uh, my favorite thing to kind of reference is like, again, like a bit of an old school case study where I think it was IBM in the like aughts built a model that looked at employee like uptime,
Oh
activity,
yeah, yeah,
keystroke volume,
yeah.
document like interfacing or document interaction, and they were able to build a productivity model, which is really just an attribution model.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. What are you attributing? Like these things attribute to X, what the outcome is. Yeah, that's a great call out. I mean, that's uh yeah, how attribution can scale outside of just a customer journey, but also the experience and one has, even to the point what you just mentioned of the output of the people in which we are paying money to do what they need to do. What's the most efficient output? Is that a 30-hour week? Is that a 40? Like, what does that sit in? And what does that look like? Yeah, I mean, to your point, like measuring and tracking is a whole nother process to build. But yeah, that's I love that concept. All right, we're kind of running up on time. I wanted to, I want to. There's so many things because these conversations are always rich. Let me. We'll end it with a pop question, and this is something I'm trying to do
All right.
with all of the people that I have on attribution time. A little bit of a spoiler, those who have listened this far, you heard the beginning. Drew loves cycling, all of that jazz. So the pop question really is what is, the hardest ride? Not that you've done, but like what is the hardest ride for cyclists, not off-road, not, trail, but like what Lance Armstrong has done or whatever that is called. You can enlighten me of what that is. What is the hardest ride for a cyclist?
In a single day or over a period of time, or see, this is an interesting point, right? It really depends on the question and the format. And it kind of goes
Yeah.
back to your question around like which funnel are we looking at,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
What's the format or the outcome? What's your business model, right?
Yeah.
All of these things.
All right, so here you go. So I'll say in a single day for those who are BDC sellers who need us close, like who have they open and
Transactional.
close right away. So in a single day, and then we'll do, I don't know how long they run, but let's say in a 2 week to 2 week period, if there's like a travel across Europe, survive the Russian bear, whatever it is, what's the ride that's the on the longer end of a week to 2 weeks. So give me those.
Nice. All right. Well, then I have three. So
Great.
it's fun that you gave me the pop question. I have three like already. So,
Love it.
um, so the hardest 1 day race in cycling is generally regarded to be Paris-Roubaix.
Okay.
And that is it's a race that occurs in the spring. It's in the north of France, and it goes from outside Paris to Roubaix. And it has anywhere from 19 to 25 sections of sometimes relatively smooth cobblestones, and other times like literally like riding over boulders on
On
on a
like
road,
on
on
like
a
street
road
bikes, on
on a
road bikes,
road
right?
bike. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, and
Interesting.
and that is generally regarded as the hardest 1 day race of the year. They just had just to give you an example, like the first edition of the women's Roubaix was actually raced, I think 2 to 3 seasons ago, and like multi-time women's world champion Lizzie Armistead, um, she she rode it, and it was also even harder because it had rained super
Right.
hard.
Springtime. I imagine you
Yeah,
get like crazy weather going on there.
yeah. So it rained super hard, and the the course was like just completely muddy, and she finished it covered in mud. And to give you an idea of the vibrations and the difficulty that are sustained by the body, it's a race that's like over 200 kilometers long. So you're pushing 130
Yeah.
miles. The
Wild.
women's version is slightly scaled back on the distance, but
It's more
doesn't
than I could
matter.
do. I mean, I don't
Doesn't
care. Like,
matter.
oh, this is insane. Yeah.
Yeah. She got to the end, and it was like she had the stigmata. Like her hands were bleeding
Wow.
from literally gripping the handlebars and making sure she won that race.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So
So I'll
yeah.
check that off as something I will never do. So give me the week to 2 week.
So the week to 2 week hardest race, Tour de France. So Tour
Okay.
de France
So it
is,
is like it has
yeah,
all this hype around it. It's
yeah,
still like yeah.
yeah. It is generally regarded as the hardest. Um, honestly, like the because it's so vaunted and so coveted as a prize for teams, it isn't necessarily the Grand Tour. That's what we call the 3 week tours in cycling. It's not the Grand Tour that necessarily has the best competition all the time, because it's very targeted and like structured and planned out. But it is absolutely at the athletic level the hardest race. It's over 2,000 miles, or close to sometimes like 2,300 miles of racing in
Wow.
21 days.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it's not a joke. And
No.
you see it. What's crazy is that the rest days, the riders' bodies become so taxed that sometimes they take that break on the rest day and the day after they get sick and have to drop out of the tour.
Yeah, their body just goes into shock. Actually, it has
Yeah.
time to rest, and it's shock, like it's trying to recover. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, so what's your third then?
So there's a race called the Transcontinental in Europe,
Okay.
and that is generally regarded as the hardest or most prestigious like ultra endurance cycling
Okay.
race. And that actually, I met the pro who has actually, or one of the pros that's won that in the past, Lael Wilcox. She's an American from Alaska, and actually, it's funny. She went to college with one of my close friends.
Oh, fine.
Yeah, and then she's the top, one of the top like women's endurance riders in the world, and she's won that before. And it's literally a race across Europe, and you basically have checkpoints that you have to hit, and it's completely self-supported too. Like you have
Yeah,
to camp by yourself, sleep when you want to sleep. If you can go with less sleep, you can do that
you
too.
push it, and that's
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So where do you start and where do you end?
So actually, the route does change, but
Oh, okay.
from what I've seen, the route usually goes from east to west.
Okay.
So it's like, but it changes
But you
every.
can choose your
Yeah,
venture there from year
yeah,
to year, season to season.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Drew, thanks so much for being a part of number 2 of attribution time. I think
100%.
I mean, we could probably go into so many other things around this. But I'll, like I mentioned, I'll put your LinkedIn in the or in the description below so people can follow you. You got a lot of fun stuff going on with LinkedIn. But I always learn a ton, and I'll always steal something from you and take it as my own. So I love these conversations. I really appreciate it, man.
No, absolutely. And no, it's super fun, and I'm stoked. I'm thrilled that you're on this content journey, and like, we're all playing this game, and it's super fun because at the bottom line, it's all about the community and
Yeah.
the cross pollination of ideas, and super fun. So congrats on kicking it off, and excited to watch it blossom.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Heck yeah.